Welcome back to Fireplace Conversations, where we gather around the warmth of honest dialogue and meaningful insights. I'm your host, Dr. Ikechukwu Okoh, and today I want to have a heart-to-heart conversation about something that's been weighing on my mind lately. The romanticized version of entrepreneurship that we see plastered across social media, magazine covers, and startup conferences. You know what I'm talking about? Those glossy photos of 20-something CEOs in perfectly styled offices holding up champagne flutes, celebrating another $1 million funding round. Today, I want to talk about entrepreneurship in the trenches and why grit matters so much more than glamour. So, pour yourself something warm, settle into your favorite chair, and let's dive deep into the real story of building something from nothing. But before we dive deeper, let me tell you why this conversation matters so much to me personally. Over the past decade, I've mentored more than 50 entrepreneurs, from first-time founders to seasoned business owners looking to scale, and I've noticed something troubling. Too many brilliant, capable people are giving up on their dreams not because their ideas are bad, not because the market isn't there, but because reality doesn't match the entrepreneurial fantasy they've been sold. They expect the journey to look like a carefully curated Instagram feed, when the reality looks more like a construction site, messy, unpredictable, and requiring hard hats and steel-toed boots. Let me start with a story that might sound familiar to many of you. A few years ago, I met a young entrepreneur at a networking event in London. Sarah had this infectious energy about her startup idea, a sustainable fashion platform connecting eco-conscious consumers with ethical manufacturers across 3 continents. She spoke with the kind of passion that lights up a room, her eyes sparkling as she described her vision of revolutionizing how we think about clothing production. She had just secured her first round of funding, and she was glowing with that particular brand of optimism that comes with early success. Her pitch deck was flawless, her business model was sound, and she had just signed partnerships with 2 ethical manufacturers. Everything seemed to be falling into place exactly as she had planned. Fast forward 18 months, and I ran into Sarah again on LinkedIn. The transformation was striking, not in a bad way, but in a profoundly real way. What she didn't tell me in those first few minutes was the full story of those 18 months. How she had discovered that ethical manufacturing doesn't always mean reliable manufacturing. How cultural misunderstandings had led to 3 separate product recalls. How her initial funding had stretched thinner than she'd ever imagined possible. The glossy exterior had been replaced by something much more valuable: depth, resilience, and a kind of quiet confidence that only comes from surviving the entrepreneurial trenches. Sarah told me about the months when she couldn't pay herself a salary, sleeping on friends' couches to save on rent. She spoke about the manufacturer who disappeared overnight, taking 3 months of inventory payments with him. About the customer service crisis that had her answering angry emails until 2 in the morning for weeks on end. She had learned things they don't teach you in business school, like how to negotiate with suppliers in 3 different time zones, how to handle customs delays that can destroy seasonal product launches, and how to maintain your company's ethical standards when every economic pressure pushes you toward cutting corners. None of this made it to her LinkedIn posts or her company's Instagram feed, but these were the experiences that truly shaped her as an entrepreneur. This brings me to the first truth I want to share with you today. The entrepreneurship we celebrate publicly is rarely the entrepreneurship that builds lasting businesses. Let me be more specific about what I mean by the entrepreneurial trenches, because I think this metaphor captures something essential about the experience. In the trenches, you're dealing with things like discovering that your reliable payment processor has frozen your account 2 days before payroll because their algorithm flagged an unusual transaction pattern, which turned out to be your first successful month of sales. In the trenches, you're learning that scaling your business actually means spending 3 weeks trying to figure out why your website crashes every time you get more than 50 simultaneous users, something that never came up during your beta testing with friends and family. In the trenches, you're realizing that building a team means interviewing 17 people to find one who truly understands your vision, then discovering 6 months later that understanding the vision and executing the vision are completely different skill sets. The media loves the overnight success story, the billion-dollar valuation, the IPO bell-ringing ceremony. But what they don't show you are the 10,000 small decisions, the daily grind, the mundane problems that need solving before lunch and then again after dinner. I remember my own early days building my first business 15 years ago. I had this grand vision of becoming the best in healthcare businesses in sub-Saharan Africa. I imagined flying to exotic locations, presenting to C-suite executives, closing million-dollar contracts over champagne dinners. What I didn't anticipate was how lonely those early months would be. There's something uniquely isolating about being responsible for every decision, from the strategic to the mundane, with no colleagues to bounce ideas off, no boss to provide direction, no safety net if you make the wrong call. I remember spending entire days without speaking to another human being, just me and my laptop, trying to build something meaningful while simultaneously questioning whether I had lost my mind for becoming an entrepreneur. My first partner meeting wasn't in a corner office overlooking the sea. It was in a cramped conference room with a broken air conditioner and folding chairs that creaked every time someone moved. And do you know that meeting taught me more about real business than any MBA course ever could? The glamour myth of entrepreneurship does something particularly insidious. It makes us believe that struggle is a sign we're doing something wrong. That if we were truly cut out for this, things would flow more smoothly. That real entrepreneurs don't face rejection, don't struggle with cash flow, don't lie awake at 3 a.m. wondering if they've made a terrible mistake. But let me tell you something. Every successful entrepreneur I know has a collection of what I call stories from the trenches. Moments when everything seemed to fall apart simultaneously. When the bank account hit zero, when the key employee quit without notice, when the major client decided to go with the competition after months of negotiations. These aren't the stories that make it to the TED stage, but they're the stories that make entrepreneurs. This brings me to something we rarely discuss openly in entrepreneurial circles: the psychological weight of building something from nothing. The constant oscillation between confidence and self-doubt becomes your daily emotional rhythm. One day you're convinced you're building the next big thing, that your solution will change everything, that success is just around the corner. The next day, you're staring at your bank balance, wondering if you're just a dreamer who's been fooling himself and everyone who believed in him. I call this the entrepreneurial whiplash, the emotional equivalent of constantly slamming on your brakes and then hitting the gas. It's exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with the number of hours you work and everything to do with the mental energy required to navigate constant uncertainty. I want to spend a moment talking about what I call the daily grind paradox. We're told that entrepreneurship is about big vision, revolutionary ideas, disrupting entire industries. And while vision is absolutely crucial, the reality is that successful businesses are built on the foundation of executing countless small tasks with remarkable consistency. Let me paint you a picture of what a typical Tuesday looked like for a young Nigerian entrepreneur during his second year in business. 6 a.m. He is up early, not because he is some productivity guru, but because that is the only quiet time he can find to work on strategy. 7 a.m. He is on the phone with a supplier in Lagos, trying to resolve a shipping issue that threatens to delay the delivery of a critical project. Between that Lagos call and the client presentation, he spent 20 minutes on the phone with his bank, trying to explain why a wire transfer from Abuja looked suspicious to their fraud detection system. Then another 15 minutes Googling how to remove coffee stain from white shirt because he had spilled his breakfast on the only clean shirt he had for the presentation. 9 a.m. Client presentation, the kind of meeting where months of work gets condensed into 30 slides and 45 minutes. 11 a.m. Back at his desk, he realizes that his website has been down for 3 hours, and he is the only one who has noticed because, well, he is the entire IT department. 1 p.m. It is time for lunch break, but it is not happening yet. Instead, he is reviewing contract terms for a potential partnership, trying to understand legal language that might as well be written in ancient Greek. 3 p.m. Strategy call with a client in Nairobi where they discussed market entry tactics, but he was simultaneously trying to fix his laptop charger with a paperclip. 4 p.m. Emergency call from his virtual assistant who couldn't access the project management system because he forgot to pay the monthly subscription fee. Now he is on 3 different customer service chat windows trying to resolve this while staying professional during the strategy call. 5 p.m. bookkeeping time, which means staring at spreadsheets and wondering why he didn't pay more attention in his college accounting class. 7 p.m. He is writing a proposal for a new project, but he keeps getting interrupted by invoice reminders from 3 different vendors, a panic text from a client about a minor website issue they're convinced will destroy their business, and his phone's low battery warning because he forgot to charge it the night before. 8 p.m. Finally had dinner, but he is still thinking about tomorrow's to-do list, which somehow grew longer despite completing 15 tasks today. This wasn't unusual, this was normal. And here's what I learned from hundreds of days just like this one. Entrepreneurship isn't about having great days, it's about having productive days when everything goes wrong. This is where grit becomes not just important but essential. Grit isn't about being tougher than everyone else or never feeling discouraged. Real grit is the ability to maintain forward momentum when nothing else is working in your favor. It's showing up on the day when your biggest client decides to terminate the contract. It's making 30 sales calls when the first 29 ended in rejection. It's rebuilding your entire system when a technical failure wipes out months of work. A friend learned this lesson in a very personal way during what we now call the March of No's. This was in his 3rd year of business, and he was pitching for a major contract that would have doubled his revenue. The client loved his initial proposal, they had 3 successful meetings, and he was already mentally spending the money. Then they went silent. For 2 weeks his emails went unanswered. When he finally reached the decision maker, she delivered the news with surgical precision. They had decided to go with a larger firm. That same week, he found out that 2 other major prospects had also chosen competitors. 3 rejections in 5 days, his projected quarterly revenue had just evaporated. He remembers sitting in his office that Friday evening, staring at his computer screen, feeling like the world's biggest fraud. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. Maybe all those people who told him to get a real job were right. That week he did something he has never done before. He called in sick to his own business. He turned off his phone, ignored his email, and spent 2 days just walking around the city, trying to remember why he thought entrepreneurship was a good idea in the first place. By Sunday evening, something had shifted, not because he had some magical epiphany or because the problems had disappeared, but because he realized that those 3 rejections had given him something incredibly valuable, specific, actionable information about why potential clients were choosing his competitors. But here's the thing about grit. It's not a feeling, it's a decision. So on Monday morning, he made a different choice. Instead of dwelling on the rejections, he analyzed them. What did the larger firms offer that he didn't? How could he position his approach as a strength rather than a limitation? He reached out to 20 new prospects that week, refined his value proposition, and started telling a different story about what made his firm unique. 6 weeks later, he signed 3 new clients, not as large as the ones he lost, but together they represented more sustainable, diversified revenue. This experience showed that grit isn't about enduring pain, but about transforming setbacks into stepping stones. So, here's something I want you to know. Grit is not a solo sport. The myth of the lone wolf entrepreneur grinding it out in isolation is not only unrealistic but counterproductive. Building a culture of grit, whether in a team of 2 or 200, starts with normalizing struggle and celebrating persistence over perfection. In my current organization, we have something we call Trench Talk Tuesdays. Every other week, someone on the team shares a current challenge they're facing, not after it's resolved, but while they're still in the middle of figuring it out. This isn't about complaining or seeking sympathy. It's about collective problem solving and normalizing the reality that great work often feels impossible before it becomes inevitable. We celebrate small wins, yes, but we also acknowledge small failures as part of the learning process. When someone makes a mistake, the first question isn't how did this happen, but rather what can we learn from this? As we begin to wrap up our conversation today, I want to leave you with 3 practical strategies for building your own entrepreneurial grit. First, redefine your relationship with failure. Instead of seeing setbacks as evidence that you're not meant for entrepreneurship, start viewing them as tuition payments in the University of Business. Every rejection teaches you something about your market. Every technical failure shows you a weakness in your system. Every difficult customer interaction reveals an opportunity for service improvement. Keep a failure journal, not to dwell on mistakes, but to extract maximum value from every stumble. Let me elaborate on that first strategy, redefining your relationship with failure, because this is where most entrepreneurs sabotage themselves. In my failure journal, I don't just record what went wrong. I record what I assumed that turned out to be incorrect, what information I wish I had beforehand, and what I would do differently if faced with the same situation again. This turns every setback into a strategic advantage for future decisions. Second, build your support network before you need it. Grit is easier to maintain when you're not carrying the entire emotional weight of your business alone. Find other entrepreneurs who understand the journey, not just the successful ones who love to share their victory stories, but the ones still in the trenches, figuring it out one day at a time. When I talk about building your support network, I'm not referring to superficial networking events where people exchange business cards and elevator pitches. I'm talking about finding people who will listen when you call at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday because you can't sleep, wondering if you're making a massive mistake. I recommend having at least 3 different types of support in your network. Someone who's been through exactly what you're going through, someone who's several steps ahead of you and can provide perspective, and someone who has absolutely nothing to do with your business but cares about you as a person. Third, develop systems that support consistency over intensity. Grit isn't about heroic all-nighters or superhuman effort. It's about showing up consistently, especially when you don't feel like it. Create daily routines that keep you connected to your bigger purpose, weekly reviews that help you learn from both successes and failures, and monthly check-ins where you celebrate progress, no matter how small. For that third strategy about developing systems, let me give you a specific example of what I mean. Every morning, before I check email or social media or news, I spend 15 minutes writing down 3 things I accomplished yesterday, 3 things I learned, and 3 priorities for today. This simple routine keeps me anchored to progress rather than getting lost in the chaos of urgent but unimportant tasks. And here's something counterintuitive. I also schedule celebration. Every Friday, I review the week and identify at least one thing worth celebrating, no matter how small. Maybe I finally figured out that technical problem that's been bugging me for weeks. Maybe I had a difficult conversation with a client that actually went well. Maybe I just managed to work a full week without a major crisis. These small celebrations compound over time, building a reservoir of positive momentum that carries you through the inevitable rough patches. As we close out today's conversation, I want to return to Sarah, the entrepreneur I mentioned at the beginning. Last month, I saw her featured in a trade publication, not for raising another funding round or launching a flashy new product, but for achieving something much more meaningful. Her company had reached profitability and was recognized for creating the most positive working conditions in their industry. When I reached out to congratulate her, she told me something that perfectly captures what we've been talking about today. She said, "The hardest days taught me the most valuable lessons, and the most boring days built the strongest foundation." If you're in the entrepreneurial trenches right now, if you're questioning whether you have what it takes, if the gap between your vision and your current reality feels overwhelming, remember this: every successful entrepreneur has stood exactly where you're standing. The difference between those who make it and those who don't isn't talent, connections, or even luck. It's the willingness to stay in the game long enough to learn the rules, adapt to changes, and build something meaningful, one difficult decision at a time. Thank you for spending this time with me around our fireplace today. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences in the entrepreneurial trenches. Send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, or leave a comment wherever you're listening to this podcast. Your story matters, your struggles have value, and your persistence is building something more important than you might realize in this moment. Until our next fireside conversation, keep showing up, keep learning, and keep building. This is Dr. Ikechukwu Okoh, and remember, grit always matters more than glamour. See you next time by the fire.